the grand illusion of the imperial harem. For centuries, the forbidden city of Beijing stood as the absolute center of the universe. To the ordinary people outside its massive, blood-red walls, the imperial palace was a paradise on earth, a place of unimaginable wealth, golden roofs, and a backyard filled with the most beautiful women in the empire. Young girls dreamed of entering its gates, believing that one smile from the emperor could elevate their entire family to the ranks of royalty, bringing eternal wealth and power. But behind this glittering facade lay a dark, dehumanizing reality. The imperial harem was not a sanctuary of romance, it was a highly organized, cold, and ruthless state machine. In the process of entering it, the consort selection was a terrifying ordeal that stripped thousands of teenage girls of their dignity, their freedom, and sometimes, their lives. It was a bizarre and cruel system where human beings were treated like cattle, graded on a checklist of impossible physical standards, and subjected to humiliating examinations. To understand the madness of this process, we must look at how the empire systematically hunted for these women, starting with a decree that froze the lives of millions. The imperial marriage ban. No one escapes. During the Ming and Qing dynasty, the selection of imperial consorts, known as the Zhu Nu draft, was a mandatory state event. When the emperor decided it was time to replenish his harem, a strict imperial decree was sent to every corner of the empire. From that moment on, a terrifying law went into effect. All unmarried girls of a certain age range, typically between 13 and 16 from eligible families, were strictly forbidden from marrying. The entire empire's marriage market came to a grinding halt. No family, no matter how wealthy or influential, dared to arrange a wedding for their daughter. To do so in secret was considered an act of high treason, punishable by the execution of the entire family. For the parents, this decree was often a death sentence for their happiness. While some ambitious families welcomed the draft, many others wept in terror. They knew the palace was a gilded cage where women were forgotten, poisoned and political schemed, or buried alive when the emperor died. Out of desperation, some families attempted to disfigure their own daughters, rubbing dirt on their faces, cutting their hair, or forcing them to act mentally unstable, hoping the imperial officials would deem them unfit. But the imperial inspectors were ruthless. Any attempt to evade the draft was met with brutal interrogation. Eventually, thousands of teenage girls, terrified and tearful, were torn from their mothers' arms, loaded onto wooden carriages, and sent on a grueling journey toward the capital. The gates of judgment, the first sifting. When the carriage convoys finally arrived at the northern gate of the Forbidden City, the Shenwu Gate, it was usually in the dead of night. The darkness added a heavy, suffocating atmosphere to the scene. The girls, exhausted from weeks of travel, were lined up in the cold palace courtyards. Thousands of anxious eyes stared at the towering walls, realizing they were now entirely at the mercy of the imperial eunuchs. The first stage of the selection was a rapid, brutal assessment of basic aesthetics. The girls were grouped in rows of 5 or 10. Senior eunuchs, carrying lanterns and measuring tools, walked slowly down the rows. They did not look at these girls as human beings, they looked at them as products. With cold, piercing eyes, the eunuchs inspected every visible detail. They checked the symmetry of the face, the quality of the hair, the health of the teeth, and the posture. If a girl was deemed too tall, too short, too fat, or too thin by even a fraction of an inch, she was immediately dismissed. A slight squint of the eyes, an uneven shoulder, or a clumsy stance meant instant rejection. The eunuchs would simply point a finger, and the rejected girls were led away. For many, this rejection was a blessing in disguise, a ticket back to a normal life. But for those who remained, the true nightmare was just beginning. The Chamber of Shadows, bizarre physical examination. Those who survived the initial screening were moved deeper into the palace, into secluded, heavily guarded chambers. Here, they were handed over to the newborn elder female palace officials and veteran imperial matrons. This was the stage of intimate physical inspections, a process so invasive and humiliating that many girls fainted from sheer psychological trauma. First came the sensory tests. The girls were made to walk around the room while the matrons listened intently. They were testing the breathing. Any sound of heavy breathing, wheezing, or snoring was documented. Next, the eunuchs and matrons would stand extremely close to the girls to sniff them. The presence of any body odor, bad breath, or underarm scent was an automatic disqualification. The emperor's consorts had to smell as pure as lotus flowers. Any natural human scent was treated as a defect. Then, behind closed curtains, the most humiliating part of the process took place. The girls were forced to strip entirely naked. The elder matrons inspected every inch of their bodies under bright light. They checked for the absolute smoothness of the skin. A seminal scar, a prominent mole, a birthmark, or a skin blemish was enough to get a girl thrown out. Birthmarks in certain areas were analyzed by imperial astrologers to determine if they brought bad luck to the emperor's lineage. Most importantly, the matrons performed highly invasive examinations to verify the girl's virginity. They used archaic and bizarre methods, such as observing the way a drop of blood reacted on the skin, or checking the tightness of specific joints. During this entire ordeal, the girls were treated with absolute coldness. They were forbidden from crying, speaking, or showing any sign of discomfort. Any emotional outburst was seen as a lack of discipline, resulting in immediate expulsion and disgrace. The trial of temperament and grace. The physical body was only half of the equation. To live in the presence of the Son of Heaven, a woman had to possess flawless manners, absolute obedience, and an unbreakable temperament. The girls who passed the physical exams were kept in the palace for several weeks of intensive training and observation. During this period, every movement they made was monitored day and night by undercover palace spies. They were judged on their walking gait. Their steps had to be perfectly measured, elegant, and silent. They were judged on their speech. Their voices had to be soft, melodic, and subservient. A voice that was too high-pitched was considered irritating, while a voice too deep was thought to harbor masculine ambition. Even their sleep was police. The girls were forced to sleep in rigid, specific postures, usually flat on their backs with their hands folded over their stomachs. If a girl rolled over in her sleep, talked in her dreams, or snored, she was deemed undisciplined and disqualified the next morning. The psychological pressure was immense. Surrounded by rivals, isolated from their families, and living under the constant threat of failure, many girls suffered mental breakdowns. The palace was testing their obedience. They wanted empty vessels that could be shaped into the perfect imperial servants. The imperial judgment the night of selection. After months of grueling physical, censor, and behavioral tests, the original pool of thousands of girls was reduced to just a few dozen. These were the elite survivors, flawless, silent, and terrified. The day of the final selection had arrived, where they would finally stand before the ultimate judge, the emperor himself. This final ceremony took place in the grand hall of the inner palace, often in the presence of the Empress Dowager, the emperor's powerful mother. The girls were lined up in small groups. The emperor sat on his golden throne, looking down upon them. The mechanism of selection varied by dynasty, but it was always highly symbolic. The emperor held jade plaques, ruby scepters, or silk pouches. Next to him stood eunuchs holding trays of silver and gold. If the emperor looked at a girl and felt pleased, he would present her with a jade plaque or a silk pouch. This meant she was chosen to join his harem. She would be assigned a rank, given a palace pavilion, and her family would immediately receive massive wealth and titles. But if the emperor was not interested, he would hand her a purse of gold coins or a flower pin. This was a polite rejection. The girl was dismissed, allowed to return to her family, and was finally free to marry whoever she wished. The tension in the room was suffocating. In a matter of seconds, with a single nod or wave of a hand, the emperor decided the destiny of these women. Some prayed desperately to be rejected so they could return to their mothers. Others, consumed by family pressure, prayed to be chosen, knowing that failure meant returning home as a disappointment. The fate of the chosen. For the lucky few who were chosen, the celebration was short-lived. They soon realized that entering the harem was not the end of their trials, but the beginning of a lifetime of imprisonment. They were placed into a strict, complex hierarchy of consorts, starting at the very bottom as low-ranking maids or concubines. To survive in the harem, they had to navigate a deadly web of jealousy, poison, and political plotting. Many of these chosen women spent their entire youth waiting in their lonely pavilions, never once being called to the emperor's bed, living and dying as forgotten shadows behind the high red walls. The imperial consort selection process was a testament to the absolute, terrifying power of the Chinese emperors. It was a system that transformed the natural beauty and innocence of youth into a cold, calculated transaction of power, leaving a trail of broken spirits and forgotten lives in its wake.